Thank you, Jordana, and I'm happy to be here today. As she said, my name is Jill Dumaine, and I've been in the industry for decades now, working on these types of topics and issues. And I have just recently changed jobs. I'm the former CEO of Bluesign and have moved into this new global VP role at SGS. But tonight where I am, I'm here to talk to you about transparency and how important that is in our industry and how it makes us more credible. And even just playing off of the poll that Jordana just gave us the results on, that number one was a changing consumer behavior and demand. And I don't think you can see a website today or a GoFundMe or a startup or a Kickstarter that doesn't show the supply chain and bring some kind of transparency so that the consumer actually sees what's happening. And I think this trend, it's not going away, and it's for a good reason. And transparency helps build that trust up and down the supply chain, whether it is among your system part or your supply chain partners or with the end consumer. And I think the consumers are starting to demand it. They're expecting it. And we need to be able to tell those stories. And the stories aren't always positive. There's some that are challenging. And that's part of the story. It's part of where admitting where we've taken a wrong turn and how do we fix it going forward, more importantly. And it does highlight some of the things that we need to change. And we can't be afraid of that. You know, we hear all the time in the sustainability conferences that we are one of the most polluting industries on the earth, and how do we own that and how do we fix it? But in order to address those sustainability initiatives, there needs to be trust in these and very solid partnerships. And these partnerships need to respect all the players in the system, because it's only when the system is working together can it be successful in implementing sustainability initiatives. And that's really where Bluesign comes into the industry. What we do is the best chemical management in the industry by working with all aspects of the supply chain. We start with the chemical suppliers and doing on-site assessments, evaluations of their products. The same process with textile mills, accessory manufacturers. We evaluate not only what they're making, but how they're making it. And we work with them to ensure they're producing to the highest environmental practices. And we also do work with brands. And during their assessment, we cover this wide range of sustainability topics. And what this does, and why I bring that up in this talk, is that with these assessments, all of our system partners have the ability to be transparent with their business partners. They can go to their suppliers, they can go to their customers, they can work with a textile mill, could work with a brand and go to an end consumer and really tell a meaningful story of what's happening in the industry. Maybe what a challenge was, how did they fix it? How did they look at CO2? Where did that come into their practices? How did they work together? The brand coming and saying, this is important to me, and this is what I'm going to do to work with you, the textile mill, to bring this forward. And for me, knowing the supply chain is just key. You can't work on transparency efforts if you don't know who you're doing business with. And in our industry, there's a lot of different levels in the supply chain, so it's easy to not know very many tiers down. But I'll say every time that I have taken a deep dive into the supply chain, I learned so many things, come back with so many compelling stories. And prior to working with Bluesign, I worked for a brand called Patagonia, and we did a ton of work in our supply chain. And Bluesign helped us at different times. We were one of the early partners, and so we were able to really help develop what this would look like. And where Bluesign brings traceability as the first step and the ability then to be transparent, it also brings a lot of knowledge. And I know when I was at Patagonia, I relied on Bluesign a lot just to understand what were these chemical issues. How could I talk to my customers about it? Not always an easy topic that customers want to hear about, and it's sometimes really difficult for brands to bring that information forward. But it's really important that we don't shy away from the topics that are creating some of the problems and talk about them, and then talk about how we fix them. And a couple of stories I can tell you from my experience. One was as CEO at Bluesign and visiting one of our textile mills, and they had a problem in their water that was being discharged, and they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And because of the traceability and being able to look at the chemicals they were using with the Bluesign system, we could find out it was on the gray goods coming in their knitted goods. It wasn't something they were introducing. So it saved a lot of time and money for this mill to be able to really zero in on the problem and go in and fix it. And then the other thing that I really wanted to emphasize is transparency is good, but it can also go too far. In 2007, I worked as part of a team that launched a very, very early project in transparency for Patagonia. And it was called the Footprint Chronicles. And we chose this instead of a traditional corporate social responsibility report, knowing we wanted to show more about what we were doing and what our suppliers were doing. But it was a new concept. 2007, social media barely existed. So the idea of transparency was really not a known concept. And so we really had to convince our suppliers to work with us and to tell their stories. And we were really proud that we could trace back multiple tiers from the garment producers to the textile mills to the fiber producers. But then we also realized the farmers, this is where they lived and where their children went to school. And we had to take a step back and think about meaningful transparency. What was important that we could show we could go back that far, but not necessarily publish their personal addresses there. So the thought that I want to leave you with is, as you're looking at your transparency efforts, don't shy away from them, but also realize the time and place for transparency and always have it tied to this larger goal on how do we move the industry forward in a really productive and responsible way. So I thank you for that, and I'll kick it back to you, Jordana.